Speaking of fertility cults and sex cults, new sex cult dropped. Orgasm cult leader, once endorsed by Gwyneth Paltrow and Khloe Kardashian, faces 9 years in prison.
They were like, oh, I'm so scared to turn on because all of those terrible men will rape me. And I said, if you want to know the real way to deflect rape, it's to turn on 100%, because then there's nothing to rape. Not only that, but with my experience is that a woman turned on 100%
Wait, what?
has every single man around her valley.
If she's turned on 100%, there's nothing to rape. It's hard to fault the logic. I've said this myself often. You can't rape the willing. You know what I'm saying? Officer, Your Honor, you can't rape the willing.
Like, you know, if I was just, who was I? Oh, I was talking to Kim and Mia about this yesterday. Like, I can go out on the street and I can just be like the Pied Piper with like a whole, I'd be like, oh my God, call me all these numbers, I'm talking to, or I can go out on the street and I can just be like totally 100% cloaked and invisible. That's the power we have. The problem with the victim story, for me, is that it takes away your power.
So, you know, typical sex positive feminine, just be a slut and then you'll become a powerful. But what's interesting about this is, like, I remember the Nixium guy, Keith Rainier, right? He went to jail and a lot of people said, like, you know, and his defenders especially were like, you know, they just doing this because he's a man. A woman can do whatever she wants and they'll never charge them with this type of shit. But this woman was sentenced to 9 years in prison.
Joining me now, the perfect guest to talk about it, is Ellen Hewitt. She's a journalist, co-author of Empire of Orgasm, a new investigative book about OneTaste. Thank you so much for taking the time. And we'll start with the sentence. Does it seem fair to you for what Daydone was convicted of doing?
Well, fair or not, that's a question that's up to the judge, and that was something that was debated in great detail today in Brooklyn Federal Court. Prosecutors had initially asked for 20 years in federal prison for Daydone, and her attorneys had asked for 12 months. And so the judge's sentence, after much consideration of different enhancements and factors, landed at 9 years. You can make a decision for yourself. Is that splitting the difference? Maybe that's fair.
Ellen, I'm very confused. I just went through all the claims that were listed out by prosecutors. Anybody who's not familiar with this case would say, oh my gosh, throw the book at her. My gosh, how no one could defend her. 200 people, including high-profile names. I'm talking CNN contributor Van Jones, West Wing actor Richard Schiff. They wrote letters in support of her, attesting to her character, her generosity, her positive influence, seemingly in an attempt to get her a lighter sentence. How do you reconcile that? How do people support her unless there's, I don't know, is this just a big misunderstanding?
I mean, I was as surprised as you to see Richard Schiff's name on this list of letters. I've watched the whole series of The West Wing. Apparently his wife is a big fan of orgasmic meditation. You know, 200 letters, I think it...
Orgasmic meditation. This is what they were selling. This is what they were selling. And I'm not really clear on what the crime was. When I read the tweet about it that guy posted, he said that, like, women were basically pressured into having sex, coercing employees to have sex with clients. She had employees partake in group pleasuring sessions called orgasmic meditation. 9 OneTaste employees testified that Dayton and former head of sales Rachel Sherwitz, huh? Witz?
Very interesting. One more observation in my Jew log.
Had manipulated them into performing all kinds of sexual acts. The expectation was I would be open to OMing. I would be open to orgasmic meditating with anybody off the streets. Dayton was sentenced to 9 years and is being forced to forfeit $12 million.
It shows that Nicole has a lot of dedicated followers, which she still does, and people who feel like she has helped them. But the judge was...
Yeah, how is that labor? I thought prostitution was illegal.
Also pretty clear in saying that the scheme that these 2 women, Nicole and her second-in-command, Rachel, were both charged with and convicted by a jury of last summer, you know, could have been targeted toward a few women while many other people were unharmed. That doesn't mean that a crime didn't happen. But it's true that Nicole has a lot of supporters. Today, outside of the courthouse in Brooklyn, there were probably 50 people gathered this morning, all prepared to, take lots of videos of them showing up to support Nicole and packing the courtroom to show that they want to be there for her.
And the $890,000 in restitution, why only for 7 victims?
That is a procedural question that I think depends on, those were 7 victims who happened to have testified at trial. So I think there was
Nigel Carlsbad. That was the guy's name. It just came to me.
a specific characterization that needed to be met there.
What was her defense?
Her attorney, as well as the attorney for Rachel Cherwitz, her co-defendant, they were largely arguing that the women who were presented by the prosecution as victim witnesses had in fact wanted this, had been, had agreed to join OneTaste, had been enthusiastically consenting to every part of it. Her attorneys used phrases like they were having a blast. And these women then got up on the stand and testified about very difficult, emotional, painful, and sometimes sexual experiences that they went through at OneTaste. So it's a bit of a, they were trying to frame it in a different way.
OneTaste. Sounds like they were having more than one taste. What is the crime? This is from the DOJ. OneTaste founder Nicole Dayton sentenced to 9 years in prison for forced labor conspiracy. This case exposed a decade-long scheme in which the defendants used psychological, emotional, and financial coercion to control their victims and extract labor and services for their own benefit. For decades, Nicole Dayton and Rachel Cherwitz preyed on vulnerable women, coercing them into a calculated forced labor conspiracy. These defendants subjected their victims to repeated psychological manipulation and sexual abuse to obtain unpaid or underpaid labor and services for their personal and financial benefit. Other sexual practices in exchange for a fee. Generated revenue by providing courses, coaching, orgasmic meditation events. Courses in other sexual practices. I'm like, isn't prostitution illegal? But it's courses. Got it. They orchestrated a scheme to obtain the labor and services of multiple young women who had turned to OneTaste seeking healing and spiritual growth by coercing them to perform labor, including sexual labor, for the defendant's benefit. OneTaste advertised that its courses and teachings could heal past sexual trauma and dysfunction. In reality, Dayton and Cherwitz used abusive and manipulative tactics designed to control OneTaste members by making them emotionally and psychologically dependent on OneTaste, including encouraging them to incur debt by opening lines of credit to finance the expensive courses, subjecting them to constant surveillance in communal homes, collecting sensitive information about their prior trauma and sexual histories, depriving them of sleep, and subjecting them to sexual abuse. There you go. Don't join a sex cult, ladies. Hey, ladies, maybe you shouldn't join a sex cult. Maybe fertility cults aren't the answer.
We're lying, we're coping, we're base your creation.